MikeHall's name has become legendary among car lovers, especially those who watch RustValley, but few people truly know the full story behind the man with the long dreadlocks, the easy smile, and the yard filled with hundreds of rusty cars. For many fans, his massive car auction in 2021 looked like the end of everything. After more than 40 years of collecting, restoring, and rescuing old cars, Mike's world seemed to disappear in a single day. Viewers of the show watched the emotional final episode where he sold off nearly his entire collection, and it felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. Yet what followed surprised everyone. New episodes started to appear. Mike was still working on cars, and his spirit looked unbroken. What really happened to MikeHall is a story not just about rust and engines, but about passion, loss, and never giving up on a dream. MikeHall was born on February 4, 1958, in St. Boniface, Manitoba, a small part of Winnipeg. When he was still young, his father took a job with the Canadian Pacific Railway, and the family moved to Kamloops, British Columbia. The move changed everything for him. The wide-open spaces, winding back roads, and the quiet life in the interior of the province gave Mike the freedom to explore. Soon, one thing began to shape his entire world: cars. But not new cars. Mike loved the ones that everyone else had forgotten. Old rusted wrecks, sitting behind barns or left in fields, fascinated him. He didn't see decay. He saw life waiting to be revived. Even as a teenager in the early 1970s, he was already dragging home broken-down vehicles, teaching himself to fix them, and learning through trial and error. Every wreck was a new challenge, and every success made his love for restoration grow deeper. By the time Mike reached his 20s, he already owned dozens of old vehicles. He wasn't formally trained as a mechanic, but what he lacked in education, he made up for with experience. He learned everything by doing: how to rebuild an engine, weld a broken frame, and bring life back to machines others considered junk. The lessons came with scraped knuckles and long nights spent in cold garages. His skills grew stronger, and so did his collection. But while he was learning to restore cars, he was also building a very different career. In the 1980s, Mike began working in rock blasting and started his own company called Chimera Springs Rockworks. It was tough, dangerous, and physically demanding work, the kind that required courage and focus. Hanging from cliffs, drilling into mountains, and setting controlled explosions wasn't something most people could handle, but Mike thrived on it. His dreadlocks and his explosive job earned him the nickname Rasta Blaster, a name that would stay with him for life. Even as his blasting business grew and brought in good money, Mike never stopped thinking about cars. Every dollar he earned from rockwork seemed to find its way into another project. He didn't care if a car was missing parts or covered in rust. If it had a story, he wanted it. Over the decades, his property began filling up with cars of every kind: muscle cars from the 1960s, old pickups, European classics, and even a few rare gems hidden under weeds. By the 2010s, he owned over 400 vehicles. From above, his land looked more like a sea of metal than a field. Some people thought he was crazy, but to Mike, it was art, a lifetime of saving history one car at a time. He called it Rust Valley, and the people who worked with him became known as the Rust Brothers. Together, they shared one goal: save old cars from being forgotten. MikeHall never set out to become famous. For years, he lived quietly with his wife and son, Connor, in the Shuswap area of British Columbia. His wife preferred to stay out of the spotlight, but she supported his passion, at least up to a point. When their farm started filling up with cars, she finally set a boundary: no more vehicles on the property. So Mike bought another piece of land nearby, a 5-acre lot in Tappan, and filled it with the rusting cars he couldn't leave behind. That patch of land, just off the Trans-Canada Highway, would one day make him famous. In 2016, while working on a rockslide cleanup in the mountains, Mike was filmed by a crew from the Discovery Channel show Highway Through Hell. It was only a brief appearance, but viewers were instantly fascinated by his fearless attitude and wild look. A few years later, when producers heard about the man with hundreds of cars trying to sell his property, They knew they had found something special. Mike had listed his land and collection for $1.19 million in 2016, hoping to sell everything and walk away. When no one made an offer, he raised the price to $1.45 million. And suddenly, news stories about his rusty empire spread across Canada. TV producers approached him with an idea, a reality series, where he and his small crew would try to restore and sell cars from his collection. Mike agreed, but only if the show focused on passion, not profit. And that's how Rust Valley Restorers was born. When Rust Valley Restorers premiered on the History Channel in 2018, viewers were instantly hooked. The show followed Mike, his son Connor, and his best friend Avery Schoaf as they brought old cars back to life. Avery, a big bearded mechanic with a sense of humor, became the perfect counterbalance to Mike's emotional and sometimes impulsive nature. The show wasn't like other car programs that focused on luxury or competition. Instead, it was real. It showed the challenges, the long nights, the money problems, and the emotional attachment that came with each car. Mike often spent far more than he could afford to make the cars perfect, and sometimes he sold them for less than what he invested. But to him, it wasn't about business, it was about love. His son Connor often tried to keep the shop running sensibly, but Mike's big heart always led the way. Viewers connected with that honesty and passion. As the show gained popularity, Netflix picked it up in 2019, giving it a global audience. Fans from around the world began visiting the Rust Bros yard just to see the famous Rust Valley for themselves. What made the show special was not just the cars, but the relationships, the friendship between Mike and Avery, the father-son bond between Mike and Connor, and the shared love for preserving history. The team became local heroes, and their small-town shop turned into a tourist attraction. But behind the fun and fame, things were getting harder for Mike. Running the business was expensive, and the bills were piling up. By 2020, he was struggling to keep the dream alive, both financially and physically. MikeHall had always been open about his challenges. He once joked that he could drop dead tomorrow after decades of hard labor, paint fumes, and long days. As he entered his 60s, he began to think about the future and what would happen to his massive car collection if something happened to him. On top of that, he discovered that his land was zoned for farming, not for running a car restoration business. Local officials had ignored it for years, but in 2021, they finally stepped in and told him that Rust Brothers was out of compliance. It was a major blow. To make matters worse, that same summer, wildfires swept across British Columbia, threatening to destroy his property. The thought of losing everything, his land, his shop, and his cars, was unbearable. Realizing he couldn't keep up with the financial and legal pressure, Mike made one of the hardest decisions of his life. In October 2021, he decided to sell almost his entire collection at auction. Over 500 cars went under the hammer in a single day, with no reserve prices. Some sold for a few $100s, others for much more, but for Mike, it wasn't about the money. It was about letting go. He said watching his cars leave was like watching pieces of his life roll away, but he also felt relief. The weight of maintaining such a massive collection was finally gone. When the auction aired as the season finale of Rust Valley Restorers, many fans believed it was truly the end. Mike had sold his dream, and the show looked finished. But the story wasn't over yet. After the auction, most people thought MikeHall would retire quietly, but that wasn't in his nature. Even after selling off 90% of his collection, he still couldn't resist rescuing old cars. He joked that they'd just find him. Within a year, he had gathered nearly 200 more vehicles, and his passion was burning brighter than ever. Behind the scenes, the Rust Valley Restorers team continued filming. Mike, Avery, and Connor worked in a smaller shop with fewer cars, but the same energy and heart remained. They focused on special projects like restoring a 1968 Shelby GT350 Mustang and a 1941 Diamond T truck, vehicles that meant something personal to Mike. When the show returned in 2024 for its 5th season, fans were thrilled. It showed Mike embracing a simpler life, working smarter instead of harder. He no longer needed 500 cars to feel fulfilled. He just needed a few good ones and the joy of fixing them. He also started collaborating with eBay Motors Canada, teaching others about finding and restoring parts online. He became an inspiration for younger mechanics, showing that passion can last a lifetime if you stay true to what you love. Today, MikeHall is in his late 60s, still living in British Columbia with his wife, his son, and his beloved dog, Minnie. He's become more than a TV personality. He's a symbol of perseverance, kindness, and love for classic cars. Mike may never rebuild an empire like before, but he doesn't need to. Behind every great man stands a loyal team, and for MikeHall, that team was his friends and family. The chemistry between Mike, his son Connor, and his longtime buddy Avery Schoaf became the beating heart of RustValley. Their laughter, arguments, and teamwork gave the show its human touch. Avery was the big, bearded mechanic who often clashed with Mike over budgets and timelines, while Connor tried to bring order to the chaos. Their arguments sometimes looked heated on screen, but they always ended with smiles and respect. The bond between these three wasn't just for TV, it was real friendship. Built over years of working side by side, Avery once said in an interview that Mike was one of the most generous people he'd ever met. He described how Mike would spend hours helping others fix their cars, or giving away parts without asking for payment. He just wants to see people happy, Avery said. And that generosity was visible in every episode. Whenever a customer came in with a personal story, maybe an old car that belonged to their late father, or a vehicle they dreamed of restoring since childhood, Mike would take it on. Even if he knew he'd lose money, he couldn't say no to helping someone relive a memory. That's what made RustValleyRestorers different from other car shows. It wasn't just about profits. It was about preserving stories. While fans loved Mike for his passion, many also admired his son, Connor. From the start, Connor played the role of the practical one, the voice of reason when his father's emotions took over. He was younger, business-minded, and more in touch with the realities of running a modern restoration shop. There were times when he had to remind Mike that they couldn't spend $30,000 fixing a car that would only sell for $15,000. But those moments weren't about money. They showed the balance between two generations. Mike represented heart and nostalgia. Connor represented logic and the future. Over time, Connor began to step out from his father's shadow. Fans noticed how confident he became in leading projects, managing employees, and dealing with clients. Mike was proud of that. In interviews, he said that seeing his son grow into a capable restorer and businessman was one of the greatest rewards of his life. Today, Connor continues to work with cars and has become a respected name in his own right. Many believe that when the day comes for Mike to fully retire, Connor will keep the Rust brothers' spirit alive, though perhaps in a more organized way. The father-son dynamic also gave RustValleyRestorers an emotional depth that connected deeply with viewers. Many saw themselves in that relationship, a mix of love, frustration, and shared dreams. For Mike, working with Connor wasn't just about passing down skills, it was about passing down values, hard work, kindness, and doing what you love, even when the world tells you it's not practical. Before RustValleyRestorers, MikeHall was just a local guy with too many cars. After the show aired worldwide on Netflix, everything changed. Tourists started showing up at his property in Tappan just to take pictures. Some brought cars to sell. Others just wanted a selfie with the Rasta Blaster. For a man who had lived most of his life quietly, the sudden fame was overwhelming. Mike enjoyed meeting fans, but he also